is now open. Last week, we brought you the first half of our discussion with Jason Diggs. He told us the early history of circling. Today, we finish that discussion. Jason takes us from the integral center, where he and a group of intrepid researchers and facilitators took the pioneering work of Ken Wilbur and Susan Campbell, mixed it with this newly founded idea of circling, and created the central modality to the relational arts that we know today. As the story concludes, we go from this laboratory environment in a community center in Boulder, Colorado, to an international adventure as the movement goes global. It's really exciting. So, how can you get more Jason Diggs in your life? Well, the best way is to go to his Substack, jasondiggs.substack.com, link in show notes. There you can find a bunch of recorded dialogues, writings, tech less, create more, all Diggs all the time. You can also check out his book, Conflict Equals Energy, Sai's favorite introduction to authentic relating. That's pretty much everywhere books are sold, and it's even on Audible, read by the author. Now, what do you do if you want to learn more about the relational arts? Funny you should say that. You need to go to thecontainerpod.com. Check out our knowledge base, okay? Check out all of our social media links. Check out the podcast. Check out the YouTube. Check out the Patreon, and become a patron by giving us small contributions every month. Your support helps the work we do, and it also means that we don't end up living in a ditch on the side of the road, so we appreciate it. And now, the second half to our conversation with Jason Diggs.
Collaborating and circling all the time, providing a lot of circling as a service, and authentic relating as a service. Then also small or like shorter educational events than longer term ones. And that to me feels like a massive, beautiful undertaking. And I'm really curious how you were. Did they have to strap wild horses to you to pull you away from? How did they pry you away from there?
Or
I guess just the next chapter is what I'm
yeah. I left to start art. That's part of the next chapter, but there's, I guess, the preamble to that chapter is like, John and Sean came to Boulder, Decker and Robert went to Europe, and so John and Sean got a little bit of training, and me and Sarah got a ton of training from all of these people. Sarah, who's 21 years old at the time, goes to Austin,
Texas.
Texas.
Sarah Ness.
Sarah Ness, yeah. And she says, well, I want to spread this, so I'm going to create authentic relating games, which there were games in, the whole Berkeley crew and what we were doing in Boulder was there was authentic relating games, but it was 90% about circling, right? And then Sarah's like, no, this is actually a thing by itself, and anyone can lead. And she's bringing a more millennial perspective to it. And she started doing this Leadership 101, Facilitation 101 course in Austin. And she started teaching when she was 21 years old. And that made people uncomfortable because she was very young. She's like 16 years younger than me. And I was the person who was like, okay, I got to cross-pollinate. I went down to Austin. I took Sarah's course as a participant at first. And then, she and I went to New York City and studied with John and Sean, because what they were doing was radically different type of circling. I remember taking SAS with Sean. That's called Secret Air Service, and it basically just means elite in Britain. So they
wondered that.
Yeah, it's kind of a silly name in some ways, but they created this elite circling training that they called SAS, And they did the first one in America in New York City because Amy Silverman was working with them. And Sarah and I went there as participants. And they were much more focused on like the super edgy, like really have focused on authenticity. They came up with these principles that are like stay at the level of sensation, commitment to connection. And the circles would just be like these like weird shamanic, like you would feel like you were on drugs and everyone was sober, and like these weird archetypal plays would play out, and they had no rules about being in one conversation. So like there was all this subgrouping that happened, and there was a lot of edginess and like people complaining about being re-traumatized, but like the field of presence was so strong. The field of presence was so strong in the early work they were doing. They had this workshop in Europe that I went to in Amsterdam called All There Is, which I thought was a really cool name for a workshop.
Yeah. And very bold name. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was their introductory workshop. And they just, John said to me during SIS, I thought this was such a weird thing to say. He goes, yeah, I think what we're doing has like a 60% overlap with what, the Boulder crew and Guy Sengstock is doing. So we decided to call it the same thing. They were fine with it.
Nice.
And like, this is how the circling movement started to have two very distinct approaches.
Yeah. So can we get even a little bit more detail about the container they were using? Am I correct in assuming this is the Circling Europe beginning? That's the
Correct.
fork. And so those early like shamanic wild intense circles, could you draw to mind like more of the container and how they set those up? Asking for a friend.
They weren't really big on setting context. Setting context is one of Decker's teaching that is so important in integral circling. It's like I'm giving a little bit of transmission of what the practice is when I set context, but mostly I'm giving people these little flags in their brain to understand what we're doing. Mm-hmm. John and Sean didn't care whether or not people were uncomfortable. So they didn't do anything to try to make people have like the ability to hang their hat conceptually on what was happening. They just spoke from the presence. And like, I remember this one moment, this might explain it. So John and Sean are teaching on one of their 5 principles and, stay at the level of sensation, commit to connection. They're going back and forth. They're teaching a little bit. And then one of them gets a little bit frustrated by the other one because maybe he felt cut off or something like that. And this happens all the time in life, right? It's like you get mildly frustrated with someone. And what's the normal thing to do in the default culture is like you push it down, you be agreeable, you try to find a way to work with this person, and like you give them grace, and you just team up with the people that you feel more collaborative with. And if you have too many of those moments of frustration, you just don't work with that person, right?
Right.
John and Sean literally full on go into like their practice together, and all of us are in the room, and they're just like flinging these energetic daggers at each other, but owning their experience at the same time, like not in a, like basically just like saying, I'm happy with, I don't like how you said that. And then you would see them do this practice, and then that's what they would do in the circles. They would just be, 110% authentic. And so that's where the fork really happened, is like integral circling is about how can we support development with acceptance, no fixing, changing, or advising, and curiosity. And circling Europe style, or surrendered leadership is a better term, is really about the raw authenticity that happens when two people encounter each other with our primal fully online.
Whoa, I really like the way you just said that.
Yeah.
With our primal fully online.
In your opinion, do you think that one practice between those two, that one leads to more connection than the other?
Connection? What do you mean by
Yeah.
that?
I mean, yeah, that's a really good. I think I want to revise my question, which is, does one practice have more, do you get more of another person's world through one practice versus the other? Do you think it's kind of a toss up? Or yeah, I mean, I think that for me is a big reason that I circle, is getting another person's world and experience. And so I think I have more, I don't know, I think in Charlottesville we maybe lean towards more this circling Europe surrendered leadership at times. And so just, yeah, from your experience of having done both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's two sides of a polarity.
Yeah.
I think they complement each other really well. And I think it's confusing for new people because they are called the same thing, but they're slightly different practices. Yeah. So the really interesting thing is, like, when I really got into my research with Susan Campbell, interviewing her, this same dichotomy existed in the 70s. Like, I was born in 75. Really? And Susan Campbell was teaching T group on the East Coast in 67.
Can you define T group?
Yeah, T group was called training group or sensitivity training. It was basically psychologists studying group dynamics. Group dynamics is a loose synonym for intersubjective or relational. So it was psychologists who were like, it was a facilitated practice in Boulder, or the new version of T group is not really a facilitated practice, but it's an authentic relating game, we could call it, where we really focus on our internal. So I'm continually naming my sensations, emotions. It's a continual process of revealing, but everyone else is also in that continual process of revealing. And it's usually 4 to 6 people. But T groups and encounter groups in the 70s, this is the thing that like blew my mind. And I have this dialogue on my Substack. You guys can listen to it with Susan Campbell. She's like, yeah, encounter groups made the cover of Time magazine in the 70s, and there was 3,000 groups happening all over the US.
Wow.
And so an encounter group, T group and encounter group are the dichotomy you're saying are like in the same way that circling Europe and like circling the other circling, the original circling are different. So can you describe encounter groups a little bit?
Yeah, people would just like be truthful to you until you broke down and cried.
Yeah, that's one way circling can look too. Yeah. I've been there.
That way.
Damn. That is so interesting. I feel in my heart, just when we're describing the two different kinds, I feel such different parts of me are drawn to each one. And there's so like, yeah, there's this feeling of like warmth and care and exploration and feeling like held and seen. And then there's also this like flexing, almost just like, whoa, I can be like so much more here and so much more. There's something like edgy and alive feeling, like really bright and like hot, you know. It's very interesting that yeah, these two sides of myself that that are being called out just by talking about it.
Huh.
That's I'm guessing that Guy Sengstock must have had experience with encounter groups or T groups.
I don't know for sure. I didn't study directly with Guy. I did a few evenings with him and I hung out with him, just personally. He was very influenced by the Diamond approach, which I also was, which was a transpersonal psychology school. It's really based on curiosity being the fuel for our spiritual development. And everyone, that's the thing. Guy was also part of the original Berkeley crew, and everyone did Landmark. Everyone took all these different workshops. They studied a lot of different things, but I think they recovered and uncovered something new. That wasn't, because if you go to Landmark, I didn't enjoy it. It's very preachy. I think there's this old paradigm of, there's a guru who tells people what to think and tells people what the philosophy is and tells people how to practice and tells people. Circling and authentic relating is very unruly. It's an open source decentralized movement, and it's really based on a much more egalitarian approach to human development. Yeah, I mean, there's no guru here. There's just the facilitator needs to be in their own practice when they're facilitating. That's really what makes this very different, I believe. And that is true in both schools. That's true in surrendered leadership, and it's true in integral circling as well.
That is a really concise way to clarify something. Yeah, what makes circling so egalitarian is that even to the degree that it's facilitated, the facilitator has to, they're still in the same zone as anyone else. They're entering into the same strictures. That is really concise. I'm going to chew on that for a long time. Thank you. So, okay, so now you're ready to leave. Oh, well, I guess you've left Boulder and you've started going to places like Austin and New York to explore how these kids are doing these new crazy circles and authentic relating. And
what was happening at the time? When I was leading courses with Robert and Porcelli, after apprenticing with them for a year and a half, I was promoted to course leader. And at the same time, I was doing the work with Sarah. Sarah and I led her course, which was, a leadership 101, facilitation 101 course, how to lead authentic relating games. We taught that together 3 times in Boulder. So I was still living in Boulder and traveling around. And, I started the first podcast on this topic, which I'm, republishing about half of those episodes, so that people can hear the dialogue I did with Guy Sengstock and the dialogue I did with, Susan Campbell and others. And so that was all happening at the same time. And then, we found out the Integral Center was going to close. And we found that out like a year before it actually closed. And that's when I branched out and started art with my co-founder. And, you know, we started taking all of the teachings from T3, and then we kind of went the other direction. So if Aletheia was like 5% conceptual and 95% experiential, you know, and T3 was like 20% conceptual and 80% experiential, we just flipped that in art. We would give people a bunch of teaching, and then after they did the curiosity game, I would circle people for 5 minutes as they're doing shares, and then we would move on to the next game. And we would put them, we would teach dignity and humility, we would put them into the guru game, and then when they were sharing after the guru game, I would circle people for like 15 minutes in the big group, and then we move on to the next game. And so the relational was baked into it, and that was the pedagogy, right? That was how the art curriculum really formed. Is we were taking what our teachers were giving us in 6 months and putting it into 2 days.
That is really awesome design. That's cool. So you kind of flip the script on, or I guess like kind of changed around the dynamics you wanted to focus on. How did you feel those changes showed up in people's experiences and in the competencies formed?
Yeah, well, we were doing it in, you know, Bali and Amsterdam and, you know, New York City and Seattle, and Portland, and, you know, we picked all the places where all the workshop junkies hang out.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, nice.
Yeah. So all the people who, you know, have done the yoga retreats and, you know, they've been in this personal growth world for a long time, they would come into our workshop and be like, this is a breath of fresh air. This is totally different. This is new. This is cutting edge. And it was because the transmission that we got from our teachers was so strong and the work was so strong. And it's just a grounded form of spirituality. You know, I could talk about welcome everything and assume nothing from a spiritual perspective, but there's no reason to. It's put into secular language, and so everyone can relate to it. And that was the magic of it. You know, I had a father and his 15-year-old daughter do my course in Philadelphia, and I had a mother who brought her 16 and 18-year-old sons to my course in Amsterdam. And so, you know, people would do the course and then they would come back on staff and they would invite their parents to take the course. So it was really focused on keeping it secular. We're not talking about chakras, and making it accessible and just letting the work do the work. Yeah.
That's something that I've been routinely struck by with circling, is that if anything, adding in spiritual terminology would just exclude some number of people. So it it doesn't add in, but then it gets you, so it sure doesn't feel like it's not spiritual. It feels profoundly spiritually transcendent and life-changing. And that it, in this way, it's like very humble in a way that it makes no bold claims about the nature of existence or the universe, but it opens you up to very transformative experiences without that. It's something very special I find about the practice. So you're going to the most beautiful places on earth and circling and teaching circling. And then does that take us to Hawaii?
Yeah, I have been doing a new project here, and a lot of it has to do with my own embodiment, and my need to slow down. Doing all of those weekends and doing all of that, we used the metaphor earlier of like being an Olympic athlete with stretching my heart, stretching my consciousness muscles, and so just needing a lot more rest. But there is a deeper current that's being cultivated here. My program here is called Tech Less, Create More. And if you look at the introduction of my book, it's based on this fact that like, oh, there's this loneliness epidemic. We've known this for about 15 to 20 years. People started to research it. There's the UK appointed a minister of loneliness at the highest governmental level, the cabinet level in UK. And authentic relating, I think, is a good antidote to this, for a lot of people. And I don't know if the way the movement's going, enough people have been trained, it doesn't necessarily need me anymore. But I think we're coming into a realization as a culture that, our smartphones and our social media apps, especially, but also Netflix, they're all designed to be addictive. Like literally from the design level, they're designed to keep us inside of that loop.
Yes.
So imagine if I was an archetype, an architect, and I wanted to design a building to prevent people from leaving the building. So this is where our culture has found itself with the business model of surveillance capitalism, which is basically, they're watching everything that we do online and making money off of it, and therefore they want to keep us online as much as possible. The seeds of this are in my book, like, in the chapter on embodiment. It's like stay human, stay embodied. The conclusion is like, we need this practice because of the rise of technology and the influence on us. So yeah, so I'm doing a residency here in Hawaii and authentic relating is baked into the residency. And I'm not the first on this. There's other people who have inspired me to do this, but there's communities, there's houses who are really baking in authentic relating practice into the community and how the culture is created and how the culture is held. But my next work, my next book is actually about our relationship to technology.
Nice. I'm really appreciating the choice when you move from the direct in-person teaching, the choice to move back and be able to make comment on like on a wider frame, because that's relational too, right? It's like community begins between two people, but it doesn't stop. It keeps going up to 9 billion or whatever. And I appreciate that. I think that I guess that kind of opens up a lot of new topics that with technology and whatnot. And I think also the way we reorganize and recommit to being in relation in a world where you do not have to be in direct, lived, experienced relation with people. But, and I feel like, that is this highway we can get on. And then I'm also seeing like, I'm just appreciating this journey we've come from these early days of these Californians coming to Boulder, bringing this circling thing to this theoretical, like these theoretical conversations are happening, and then this circling thing comes and sits down in the room, and then that has launched this global movement in a way. That I know personally has changed my life, and so I know it has the power to really rescue people. I'm almost embarrassed by how saved I feel by the practice. Like when
Almost embarrassed.
Yeah, like when I think about it, I'm like, wow, the feelings I have towards circling are, they're almost, there's a way that they are embarrassing to me. Yeah. I'm curious, like, here after 20 years on the path, some of your reflections on a life lived with these practices.
Well, I encountered these specific practices about 12 years ago, because the Ken Wilber community didn't necessarily have this baked in until Robert started the Interval Center. But so if I just modify your question to 12 years, I love that this practice has legs. I really believe that 10 years from now, emotional education is going to be everywhere. And it may or may not be authentic relating, but it's one part of this wave that is really needed. I think that can you ask me a more specific question? Because I tend to get philosophical or like think about society a lot. It's just how my concept is shaped. But
I guess I'm curious about reflections you have with the length of time you've spent with these practices in your life. I know that in a very short amount of time they can totally transform the way you relate to people, and then a little bit further down the road it feels to me so far like it's just, man, it doesn't let up. It's really powerful and transformative, and it's just a magical world. It is a magical world that I want as many people as possible to know about. And I look to elders on the path like you, and I think like, wow, like what is his experience much further along on the path with these tools that have just like, he's had so much more time with these tools. And I don't know if that's clearer. I think I just said it again, but
my felt experience, which I don't talk about very often, is that like it has a spirit unto itself. So it's like, Vipassana has Vipassana lives in a world, the world as a thing. Like people talk about it, like, or the archetype of the magician, like Merlin, like Carl Jung talked about how these archetypes live in our subconscious. Well, relational practice is like that. And when I try to take ownership of it or pretend like I'm special for doing it, my ass gets handed to me pretty quickly. Like it goes much better for me if I am like, wow, I feel so honored that I get to have a life where spreading this work is part of it. And I think that's partly because the original teaching is was about dignity and humility and posture and collapse.
Just gonna say that. I was just exact. I'm sorry if I'm interrupting you, but I was like, I'm thinking ahead of to tonight, where a group of us are going to play that game.
Guru
And
game tonight.
As you were saying that, I was going to say, like, will you be the guru of authentic relating for like 2 minutes, and then we'll be the disciples and ask questions. I was just imagining that taking place. Sorry, it was exciting.
Yeah. And it's very humbling.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's humbling to be in the guru chair, because the transmission of this is so strong if you open to that channel of it. And it helps my humility to realize, like, oh, this was in the world before I was born. That's the reason I talk about like what Susan Campbell was doing in 1967, is because it helps me to think about it as something that lives. It's like a spirit that wants to come into the world, and we're willing vessels on a good day. But then it's also humbling to move to the student role, or like, and it's like a little bit hurtful and humbling when the universe has to kick you in the ass to move you to the student role. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's really
I'm resonating right now with getting your ass kicked and being moved to student again. Yeah, so I want to be respectful of your time. But I also want to get, if you could, what are, like, if someone is just beginning, I want to make 2 buckets: people who are just beginning, and then also people who are well on their way on circling and want to, like, up things. I'm wondering about, like, what are some systems of thought or books, or like, what are little adventures, intellectual or experiential adventures people if you were talking to yourself when you were just learning circling, what would you tell yourself? Like, well, there's this whole kind of yoga you can look at, or there's, study Ken Wilbur, or whatever. Do you have those at hand? I would love to hear some of those.
Yeah, I imagine this is coming from like a dedicated learner. Like when I experience Jonathan, I see someone who's like, oh, I want to like learn from all of these sources. And it's like, I'm curious, like what is it like to be a dedicated learner?
Wow. This is fun. It feels like, I guess, what does it feel like to be a dedicated learner? I feel excitement right now thinking about, you're about to tell me things that are going to lead to like 100 books and a bunch of stuff I could go look at and really get a lot out of. I'm getting like, it's almost as someone in recovery, it's like I'm noticing there's something sort of like addiction in it. There's something sort of like, oh, I'm like ramping up to like, I'm gonna get some good mind hits out of this. There's something like that. It's much more innocent, obviously. But it has that kind of like, dopamine, like kind of, I'm getting excited about it. And then there's also this sense of just like wonder and awe, I think, too, that like they kind of live together in there.
Yeah, I really trust the part of you that's like following the wonder and awe.
And where would you lead that part? I'm curious.
I would say teach more. I would say like sit in the guru chair and offer recommendations for books and information journeys to others.
I feel like I got
answer.
like, yeah, jujitsu'd on that one. Yeah, interesting. I noticed that we had Kathy Courtney on.
I was just about to say,
Yeah.
can I say
Yeah,
what I
yeah.
think you're gonna say?
Yeah,
And
sure.
then you tell me if it was what
Yeah,
you were gonna say. Okay.
that's a fun game.
When we asked a similar question to Kathy, her response was do the inner work.
Mhm.
And I'm noticing like your response is teach more. And so it's like the duality of those two, like do the inner work and teach more. Like those both feel kind of like earlier, what the two sides of the same coin. Is that where you were?
Yeah, and that, I mean, I think she was said something like the information is inside of you already.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that there is something that I am really coming to appreciate, that human beings, by dint of being social creatures, are like it is in our nature to connect and relate. And to the degree that we have trouble connecting, it's usually learned behavior. It's like something getting in our way, that, you know, we are kind of like the way that monkeys can just flip around on from limb to limb and are great acrobats. It's like we can do that in relating. We are like that, but in conversation. I mean, if humans can't be good at conversation, who do we leave it to, you know? Yeah, so I don't know, that's kind of where I end up.
Yeah, what I hear you saying is like connection is really natural,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's like nonverbal connection is natural, verbal connection is natural. Like that is really what makes us human. You know, and the part that like wants to add something to that, or like study communication, study more, is like probably a highly functional, beautiful part of yourself, right? But it's not the core of, it's not the essence of who you are. Like when I experience your essence, it's kind of like this excited explorer. And an explorer is like, there's no map. They're the ones who go out into the jungle and then come back and make a map for people.
I am inspired as hell, Jason. That really, I feel I really resonated with that, and I'm ready to do more exploring now. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on here and giving us this beautiful firsthand account of the history of circling and authentic relating. I'm curious, for people who want to get more access to your thoughts and your words, how can they do that?
Yeah, it's mostly my Substack, which is, yeah, it's currently called Tech Less, Create More, but it has a lot of the authentic relating archives stuff that I've, like I went through. I did a podcast from, gosh, it must have been 2012 to 2017, like those 5 years. I did 30 interviews. And so I like took the best of those and republished them. And I have all these dialogues. Like I was going through my hard drive and I found this dialogue with me and Jordan Allen. And Jordan Allen started the Relateful company. He started Circle, and then he changed it to the Relateful company. And he's one of the strongest teachers out there. And he stopped teaching because he's trying to like help humanity through social media, like a social media that's not addictive, that's actually builds our wisdom. So he and I are on little parallel tracks, but I did an interview with him 2 years ago, and I listened back to it, and it's of the 50 plus dialogues that I've done with other AR leaders, it was the best. And because of weird circumstances, it never got released. And like the world's never heard it yet. And so that's there for people to check out. And yeah, otherwise, yeah, just reach out to me. I have a website as well, but most of the good stuff is on the Substack.
Gotcha.
So yeah.
Do you have the Substack the link? Remember, my mind just melted down for a second. I don't know why.
jasondiggs.com. The Substack is on the front page of that. The link to it.
Gotcha. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow. I feel, again, so grateful. And I appreciate your memories and your viewpoint and the path that you've walked. And I'm going to be reaching out to you a lot in the future. So I'm sure we'll talk again.
Please do. I'm really enjoying getting to know both of you as colleagues, and I love what you're up to in the world. And yeah, thanks for creating the container.
Now closed. We'd like to give a big thank you to Jason for sharing his knowledge and first-hand experience with the history of circling and authentic relating. Remember to check out his Substack, jasondiggs.substack.com, link in show notes. And you know what to do, thecontainerpod.com people, go to the YouTube, like and subscribe. In future episodes, we are embracing the coming spring season. And we're very excited for all that we have in store for you. Thank you for joining us today, and take care of each other.